Shalom and welcome everyone to this week's ICEJ webinar. We're so glad that you've joined us from all over the world. If you're on the live broadcast right now, put it in the chat where you are from. Just thank you for being with us. We're at around day 230 of Israel's war with Hamas terrorism in Gaza and on other fronts, still covering the many difficult aspects of this war. And today we have a special guest, our friend Chris Mitchell. He's the bureau chief for the Jerusalem Bureau of CBN News, a good friend for over 2 decades now, and really reporting from the front lines of this battle here in Israel. It's going to be good to hear from him. Hi, Chris. How are you?
Hey, great to be with you, David. Yeah, we go back a long time. I came here in August of 2000, but you preceded me by several years. But it's really a privilege, to be reporting here on the front lines of Israel's history.
Yeah. Now, I'll start with a hard question, and this is the one that all the Israelis, when I tell them I've been here over 20 years, first thing they ask is, how's your Hebrew?
I know what you're going to ask. That's probably the number one question I get too. My Hebrew's not very good, I had to say. I have tried. I've gone to have private lessons, gone to, an Olpan, but I guess language is not my forte.
It's low tov. That's what I have to say. It's sort of embarrassing. Yeah. Jesus going to come back. The first thing he says, "You've lived here all this time, you learn Hebrew." But like me, Israel is deep in my heart, but I can't get the Hebrew in my head.
That's a good way of putting it. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. That's the hard question. Now the easy one. No, we'll get serious. We're talking about the serious subject of this war that we've been stuck in now for over 7 months, 7.5 months. Who would have thought? But when this started. But where were you on October 7th? This is first time we've had you on a guest since this war started. Where were you, and what were those first days like for you and your news team?
Well, they were pretty traumatic and pretty chaotic in a sense. I was here in Jerusalem. We live in the same neighborhood, not too far from where you are. And, we heard, actually, I had get up early and I was in my office and my wife came in and Liz, and she said, "Do you hear those sounds?" And which I didn't. And as soon as I got up and started listening, I heard the sounds of the rockets that were coming in as far to Jerusalem, and we heard the sounds of the Iron Dome knocking them out of the air. When we heard the scale of what happened on October 7th down south, it was pretty clear, almost within the first few hours, how serious it was. We did 3 shows that first day to the next day, and almost for the next 2.5 months, almost every day we were reporting on what's happening. We still do daily updates Monday through Friday, and if necessary on the weekends. But it was a sea change, David. We've been here for many, many years. We've lived through the Second Intifada, the Second Lebanon War, and several wars with Hamas, but this was different. And the worst, attack on the Jewish people since the Holocaust. It really has struck the heart of the Jewish people here in Israel and around the world, especially with the explosion of anti-Semitism in the last couple of months. But it's really a different Middle East right now. It's a different Israel. And so it's very, very important. And what you do at the ICEJ, what we strive to do here at CBN is really tell the accurate story of what's happening here in the land right now.
Yeah, I remember those early days. I tuned in a couple of times myself. Y'all were streaming and had you and, of course, Julie Stahl and John Waggy and someone else you had brought in. You had 4 of you on split screens, one here, one there. What's going on? And it was a lot of information flowing out of your team there. It was very good and very helpful. But you're right. We've lived here for over 25 years and lived through the second Intifada with every bus you thought was going to blow up.
Yeah.
You were here during that time, but this is far more difficult, especially because of the hostages. It's still weighing heavy on this nation.
Yeah, in fact, we're doing this just after this 3-minute video that was released of 5 of the female soldiers that were kidnapped. It's only 3 minutes, but it's gut-wrenching. It's a little more personal for us because we interviewed a girl named Sasha, and her Karina is her sister, and she's one of the 5 soldiers. And it just to know somebody that is a relative of one of those 5 girls, it brings it home. And as we've seen this play out, David, even one person, even one soldier, even one person kidnapped is really like a family affair here in Israel. We remember Gilad Shalit, I believe, in 2011. It was years of soul searching and what are we going to do to get this one soldier out? But when you multiply that at the very beginning of about 250, it's just heart-wrenching. And for people that haven't been here to Israel yet, you can't go far in Jerusalem or anywhere in the country without seeing a poster at a bus stop, some sort of a banner, about bring them home now or let them go. It's just such a emotional attachment to each one of these hostages by the Israeli people.
Yeah, I remember once I went full time as a Christian advocate for Israel in Washington. When I worked there, there was this soldier, Nachshon Spokesman, who had been kidnapped in Jerusalem. Wound up, he was only taken about a mile away to a safe house near Ramallah, but they released videos of a gun to his head. And even me in America, with the heart God has given us for Israel, you felt like you had a gun to your head with one soldier. And you're right, it's so multiplied. And we've had several of these hostage family members speak to some of our solidarity missions. Once you meet them, there's this debate in Israel. The priority should be defeat Hamas. No, it should be get the hostages back. How do you explain that to Christians? Once you meet these families, you sort of lean to getting the hostages back, don't you?
Yeah, you do, and you see their plight, and you certainly can understand that emotionally. If this was your son or daughter, or brother or sister, father or mother that was kidnapped, your priority would be do whatever you can to get my loved one back. On the other hand, it's so hard that if you do that, you can sacrifice other goals that are necessary as well to defeat Hamas. What do you say to some of the soldiers that have died in the line of fire? What about their sacrifice if you end the war and stop short of victory? Are their lives in vain? If you go ahead and negotiate and maybe have 50 or 100 hostages, and then you have 600 or 700 Palestinian prisoners released, what about the victims of their future potential terror? And that has happened. There were about 1,100 Palestinian prisoners in exchange for Gilad Shalit. One of those prisoners was Yahya Sinwar, the leader of Hamas, who has, probably taken Gaza Strip to a whole new level of terror. And so how do you reconcile that? It's a dilemma for Israeli people, like never before. And I wanted to ask you, David, you had a personal attachment to October 7th because just a few days before that day, you were down in the South in a kibbutz, and you had several hundred people from all over the world celebrating the Feast of Tabernacles, and met one of the, you were there with one of the mayors, I believe, of the city of, was it Kfar Aza?
He was head of the regional council in Sha'ar HaNegev. We had around 700 Christians from 50 countries there on a solidarity visit 2 days before it happened. And I introduced the mayor to our people, and he was Ophir Lipstein was his name. And 2 days later, as it's happening, you're following the news. By 9 a.m., just a couple hours into it, he was the first named casualty. And you had just been standing there with him, introducing him to the crowd. We've had a great relationship with him, and he died just outside of his home, rushing out. He heard the gunfire and was rushing out with his weapon to try and see what was happening, and was gunned down just outside his home. Very, very tragic. And Chris, going back there to Kfar Aza, one of the worst hit communities, we visited several times over the last 7 months. And there were municipal elections on, and his posters were still hanging all around. And that's part of the weight we carry from this one. It got very personal. You're right.
Yeah, yeah. We've been down to Kfar Aza as well. And, one of the things about that day was that not only was the Hamas terrorists that came in, these elite units by several thousand, but it was also many of the people of Gaza, this second wave, as they talk about, many of them that had worked in these kibbutzim, that had been driven by some of the people in these communities to the hospital, and they came in. Some of them committed the atrocities. Some of them kidnapped Israelis. Some of them robbed these homes because they knew where the jewels were, the money was. They had worked in these places. So it really is hard to imagine exactly what happened on that day on October 7th.
Yeah, Ofer Lipstein, this mayor, had raised like tons of money to build a joint industrial park right near the Erez crossing that would have employed around 10,000 Gazans in jobs at Israeli wage rates. They could have fed 20 people, a family of 20. And he's gone down. There's just something so unjust about what happened to him. He worked for peace. Look, I want to ask you a couple. You mentioned the Gilad Shalit precedent, where Israel gave up over 1,000 prisoners, including Sinwar, for one soldier. With that sort of precedent, were you surprised even that Hamas let go of around 100 hostages so early in this war?
Well, I think they must have thought or calculated that they could continue to get a lot of concessions. But we've seen through these negotiations that after that late November negotiations and release of about 100 hostages, their demands were the end of the war and the withdrawal of all the Israeli troops from the Gaza Strip, which basically they would have won the war, and Israel would have not won the war and basically lost the war. So I guess maybe I'm not surprised after that initial negotiations that they refused to sort of, try not to end the war. It was something Israel can't agree to. They just can't. If they want to survive, you'll have all these people in the southern communities not willing to go back to their homes if Gaza in any sense remains. And that leads to the whole issue, David, a two-state solution that seems to be imposed or trying to be imposed by the United States, by so many other nations of the world, including 3 yesterday, Ireland, Spain, and Norway, that are going to declare a Palestinian state. But I don't think any form of a Palestinian state that would include any semblance of Hamas, even if they were quote unquote civilian, or even the Palestinian Authority, is acceptable to the majority of Israelis.
Yeah, I think the international community is guilty of the same type or sort of groupthink that caused Israel to be so surprised by this attack on October 7th. They think that a Palestinian state right now, giving it to them, is going to help make peace here, and it's the exact opposite.
No, and how many years have we been reporting on this? The Oslo Accords are over 30 years old. That was going to be the two-state solution, and they've tried for 30 years. And how long do you continue to try to make this happen And we talked to, and I know you have many times as well, Itamar Marcus, probably the leading expert on what the Palestinian Authority says in their own language. And, we talked to him recently, and he says they're trying to fit, their own paradigm, their own worldview, but they're kind of ignoring the reality on the ground. They're ignoring what the PA says in their own language, how they talk about a return of all the refugees, about they talk about from the river to the sea, and they see, in their own language, see this as a religious war, that they need to eradicate the state of Israel, drive out the Jews, so how the State Department and others in the international community don't recognize this or don't see this is hard to understand, actually.
Yeah, I think to give up this land, it only improves the Palestinian side the way they wage war against Israel and try to destroy it. It's only going to help them and be a reward for terrorism, as many are saying. What you've talked to a lot of people about how Israel got so surprised by Hamas on October 7th. What have you learned talking to the experts, talking to government, military officials and all? We know groupthink was part of it. Everyone thought Gaza, that Hamas was too preoccupied, too busy governing Gaza and wasn't interested in war. Is that the full, or there's some other things that contributed to this huge, huge surprise attack?
I think part of it was groupthink, David, as you said. Part of it I've heard is arrogance. We thought Israelis thought we were too strong. They underestimated Hamas, and that's one of the failings of any war. If you underestimate your enemy, I just think they didn't think it would happen. In fact, David, we looked at a story we did a number of years ago. I did a stand-up not too far from the Gaza border. We had interviewed somebody in a beautiful kibbutz. I can't remember the exact name right now. But in the stand-up, I said, Hamas, the concern here is that they would breach the border, and I'm paraphrasing, and then come in, kill Israelis. I think in my own mind, I thought it was sort of theoretical, but it would never happen in practice. So I felt the same sort of shock and surprise on October 7th. I just think we had the sense that, Israel's too strong. The fence is too much of a barrier to cross. And if they did, then the IDF would show up. So I think there was a number of factors that led to October 7th. And there were warnings. There were intelligence reports that came out before October 7th, warning of something like this could happen. Many of those, tragically, many of those young girls, the 5 we saw in the video last night and dozens of others, they had warned of what was coming. They had seen some of the training going on, but apparently their superiors disregarded that. We also interviewed General Goldfuss. We had the opportunity to go into Khan Yunis a few months ago and go into one of the terror tunnels. One of the first things he said as he would brief many of the reporters was he failed. And I think some of the higher up IDF echelon, I know one in the intelligence has resigned. They do take responsibility, and they feel that they, on their watch, they failed and allowed the biggest massacre of Jews since the Holocaust.
We want people to put some questions in the chat. If you have a question for Chris Mitchell, he's the CBN bureau chief. We're talking about the war that has been now in its 7th month. Chris, I remember just a few weeks before Sukkot, the feast, before this war began, seeing some video out of from Hezbollah in Lebanon of these commandos, armed terrorists on white motocross bikes, jumping little hills and whatever. And I sort of laughed at it. They're going to come against the IDF. But in retrospect, very, very chilling. They were signaling even what they were training to do up there and still want to do. Even the northern border is still very hot and active, and that possibility still exists.
Yeah, very much so. And I've watched some of those videos too, David, and felt the same thing. You kind of laugh at it and say, well, is this an army that's going to attack the IDF? Yet, if given the chance, and they have been preparing as well. We've reported probably about 3 years ago when they discovered, I think, 6 Hezbollah tunnels on the northern border, just like Hamas had been building down in the south. And they were preparing for the same sort of scenario as October 7th to capture many of these communities on the northern border. In fact, got all the way to the Galilee. So it's now in retrospect from October 7th, it's foolish to go ahead and underestimate what Hezbollah wants to do, or Hamas for that matter.
Yeah, I think last summer that someone infiltrated the northern border from Lebanon. They still haven't figured out where he got over, but he made it all the way to the Megiddo Junction, Armageddon,
Yeah.
right there, and planted a roadside bomb. So they're always devious in their planning. This has been 7 months or more now of reporting. I know your team has been at it day after day after day. But tell us some more of the stories you covered, some of the people you spoke to that really stand out, that are interesting, and what they suffered or how they've endured this.
Well, I did mention General Goldforce. He was the general, I believe, of the 98th Division, and he took about 16 journalists, including myself and our friend Joel Rosenberg, into Khan Yunis, and we had the opportunity to go into one of the terror tunnels. In fact, we were in one of the tunnels where they know that there were 12 hostages held there at one time. 3 of those 12 were released, and that's why they know that a number of 12 were kept there. Once you go into these tunnels, you recognize at first how long it took to build these, how much money it took to build these. General Goldforce said that they found tunnel shafts almost everywhere, in a home, in a mosque, in a school, even a supermarket, where they were just ubiquitous all over the place.
Kind of overdoing it, huh?
What's that?
Kind of overdoing it, maybe.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah.
Almost more tunnels than there are in the London Underground.
Underground, yeah.
As you go down there, you see it's like a spider's web. They have tunnels leading off the main tunnel, and we actually saw a room where they had built a cage to keep the hostages in. So it was very moving. I was there with Joel Rosenberg. We had the opportunity, the 2 of us, to pray there for the release of the hostages. Later, we had the opportunity to actually take communion there and in that land, to pray that God would redeem it. And I think that's maybe a reminder for all of us as believers that we can continue to pray for the release of the hostages, for victory over Hamas, for the protection of innocents in Gaza, and for the redemption of this land. And that the gospel would go forth to combat this ideology. It's really a culture of death. They do preach death. They love death. They believe that if they become a martyr, they'll be in paradise. And I think it's the gospel, the good news of Jesus, that can combat that.
When you went into Khan Yunis, you heard a lot of the battle and just in the background, in the distance. How close were you to the front line there?
Well, we could hear gunfire in the distance, and we heard the drones, and I think you hear that all the time there in Gaza, the sound of the drones. But we could hear gunfire. I think we were far enough away that it wasn't in immediate danger. We went in with APCs, and then we went into an area that had been cleared out, and we spent about maybe an hour and a half, 2 hours in these tunnels. But really a reminder, and it was really to see it firsthand, was striking to see, how much effort was put into these tunnels. And, as I think Yoav Galan said at the very beginning, as they began to go in there, Gaza Strip had become the largest terror base in the world.
Exactly. Yeah, I know that some of the solidarity missions that we have brought to visit the destroyed communities along the Gaza border, everyone, you get in that area and, it seems kind of quiet until you hear some of the outgoing artillery. It's you're safe. It's IDF outgoing, not incoming, which
Exactly.
is
And it's pretty
reassuring.
loud.
All of a sudden you realize you're in a war zone because it's just a few hundred meters away, and the blast, you can not only hear it but feel it. And a couple of these visits up in Gaza City are looking from Nir Oz over into the Khan Yunis area. You see the big mushroom clouds coming up live when you're there, standing there, and the war is clear. You visited some of these communities. What stands out in the destruction? I cannot forget that row of houses in Kfar Aza looking out towards Gaza City, where all the young people in that kibbutz were put there, young singles growing up, their first time living outside the house, and they were slaughtered, and the area just shows the carnage there.
Yeah, I've been there as well. And what strikes me is that the lifestyle there was so idyllic. It was pastoral. These kibbutzim are beautiful. There's such a communal lifestyle. We saw that in Kfar Aza. We were in Nir Oz as well, another kibbutz that was devastated. And as our guide took us around there, he was saying, well, my grandchildren were living over here, maybe about 100 feet away. My daughter was over here. It just was such an ideal lifestyle that they were living in. I mean, they didn't know how desperate and perilous the danger was, but they were living such a beautiful lifestyle. I would love that myself, to be so close to family. You live in a community that just seems so ideal, and really that kind of lifestyle for thousands of people is gone. I don't know if they ever get it back. Some people want to go back and they want to rebuild. Others don't want to go back at all. And so we'll see how that plays out. But, I guess more than even more than the destruction of the buildings, but certainly not as serious as all the people that were kidnapped or killed. But there was a lifestyle that was really destroyed on October 7th that I don't know will ever come back for a long time.
Where do you see the conflict going right now? For several weeks, the hostage talks have been off. There's been no progress. They just dropped any effort. But now it seems they're trying desperately to pick it up. It seems that Prime Minister Netanyahu is going to have to settle for less than total defeat of Hamas because of the threat of these arrest warrants from the International Criminal Court. It does look like things are heading that way.
Yeah, and it seems like it's one more effort by the international community, the ICC, the UN, even the US, to try to put the brakes on the war, to try to stop it short of victory. And I think this is Benjamin Netanyahu's Churchill moment. Is he going to, he's really the one holding back all the pressure that seems to want to rescue and save some semblance of Hamas.
Yes.
Start a two-state solution. I think, is he going to be keep going, as Churchill would be in 1939, 1940, before the U.S. came in the war? He seems to be the one holding everything back. So we'll see. I don't know if the ICC will be the tipping point for him, but I get the sense that he will continue. There's talk about him going to Capitol Hill in Washington to speak to the Congress.
Mm.
I was at the Yad Vashem a few weeks ago. I know Jurgen was there as well to hear that there was an Holocaust Remembrance Day. And when Benjamin Netanyahu spoke, he said, if Israel has to go it alone, we will go it alone. And this was preceded a few days earlier by the threat of the U.S. holding back some weapons if the IDF went into Rafah. So I hope he holds course and to be able to finally defeat Hamas and then head to the next war, which probably be with Hezbollah.
Yeah, but where we stand right now, just for our viewers, help us sort of get the picture that the cabinet, the war cabinet, the three-man war cabinet of Netanyahu, Yoav Gallant, who's also threatened with arrest warrant for war crimes, and then Benny Gantz from the center, who came in and formed this emergency unity, national unity government, and those three figures and the observers in it. They voted last night after the release of the footage of the five girls. Really heart-wrenching to see that. They made a decision, recap that for us and how that looks going forward.
Well, it would be hard not to do anything to restart the talks after seeing even 3 minutes of what was a 13-minute video. There were five families involved in the decision to release the video, and they edited 10 minutes out that was much more graphic. And if you see how graphic the 3 minutes was, then you understand how bad the full 13 minutes would have been.
The girls are limping from being beaten up. One girl has a busted lip. They all have blood on their faces. Horrible.
Yeah, they threatened that they were going to impregnate them. They were going to shoot them. They called them dogs. So just a horrific situation for these girls that are bloodied, bullied, and terrified. You can see the terror on their faces. So I think it would be hard for the War Cabinet not to do anything to renegotiate and start the talks again. But I think they'll face the same issue. Hamas is going to make the same demands, I would think. Those two main demands: end the war and and allow us to, survive and have the IDF pull out of Gaza. Despite all the emotion of today, I don't know if Netanyahu will agree to those conditions.
Yeah, so they did vote to try and restart the negotiations that had been off for several weeks. And it's prompted by the threat of these international criminal court arrest warrants, which there's time to try and avert those, at least on Israel's behalf, and good reasons to do it. But with this footage, I think Israel could show new footage every day to the world and try and win some sympathy back for what happened on October 7th. But you've also got tomorrow the World Court of Justice in The Hague, also in The Hague, is supposed to issue its latest ruling about the Rafah operation. Are y'all hearing anything? Do you expect that to go one way or the other?
Well, it could go against Israel. I think initially when South Africa presented the case, and I guess now Egypt is part of this as well, they decided not to intervene into Rafah. What they do tomorrow remains to be seen. I'd like to ask you a question, David. With the International Court of Justice, and now with Ireland, Norway, and Spain, declaring a Palestinian state, what's the next step? Where does that go in terms of any legal apparatus in the international community?
Yeah, well, I find what Spain and look, there's already 130 some countries that recognize a Palestinian state. They've been recognizing another batch since 1988 when Arafat declared a state. And they can do it all day long, but you're not really a state until you have a recognized authority, unified on the territory that you claim, and the Palestinians have neither. And what's quite interesting is the hypocrisy of France, who was a permanent member of the Security Council, that just a few weeks ago voted for the resolution for a Palestinian state, saying they met the qualifications, and voted for it. And the U.S. Had to veto that in the Security Council, which under the UN regulations, the charter, only the Security Council can give that ultimate authority of conferring statehood. So that France voted for that resolution just a couple weeks ago in response to now Spain and Ireland and Norway want to recognize a Palestinian state. That'd be number 131 through 133 or something like that. They said we cannot recognize France said we cannot recognize it because it does not qualify yet as a state. It doesn't meet the requirements. Well, why did they vote for it in the Security Council just a couple weeks ago? So I think it's this groupthink that somehow giving them statehood is like the magic moment, the magic wand that's going to bring peace to the region, when actually it's going to deepen the conflict by giving the Palestinians a whole new platform to wage their war for destruction of Israel.
Yeah. It seems to be the panacea of the United States, or the State Department, I should say, and in many of the nations, that if we can solve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, then peace will break out in the Middle East. I heard a journalist the other day say, "Well, does that mean the Yemeni economy is going to grow? That there's going to be peace between Iran and Saudi Arabia?" After 30 years, it seems more of a fantasy.
Yeah, we need less groupthink and more Godthink.
Amen.
Yeah, listen, we got a couple questions coming in. Let me see if we can ask some. Them burned in their pits. Some of these. I'm just trying to find some that are suitable for asking on air here. Someone's sort of asking about the day after the war. What's going to take place after the war is over? We really can't figure that out yet. What pressure is being put on the Red Cross to check on the children, including babies that are still in captivity? We know there's one family, they're probably the last of the children, but even the women, the elderly, I think the Red Cross has done exactly zero. What do you think?
No, I think so too. They don't seem to be putting any pressure on Hamas to see the prisoners, or the ones that have been kidnapped. So I think the Red Cross, UNRWA is another subject, but I think the international organizations really seemed to put the onus and the pressure on Israel and the blame on Israel rather than Hamas. We were talking not too long ago, David, talking about the hostages. You can say one of two phrases. You can say, bring them home now, which really puts the onus on the Israeli Netanyahu government, or you can say, let them go, which puts the emphasis on Hamas. Hamas holds these people. They're the ones that could have let them go. And tragically, we understand there are 128, I think officially hostage. We don't even know how many are alive. And maybe most of them may have already perished. The IDF has been recovering some bodies lately, 4 bodies in the last several days. But so the Red Cross really hasn't done much. And I think the UN, not only UNRWA, has been disingenuous about the humanitarian aid going into Gaza, blaming Israel for a famine or near famine or starvation. My understanding is that really is not true. And Israel is doing what they can to send in humanitarian aid, whether it's from Ashdod or Ashkelon. They've allowed the U.S. to build this pier. They've opened up Kerem Shalom, even though it was bombed by Hamas, and doing what they can to supply often their enemy, because Hamas steals much of this aid. But I think the Red Cross and the UN have really been disingenuous during these many months.
Yeah, this brings up that the two international courts in The Hague, the World Court, which is tied to the UN system, and the separate International Criminal Court, they've probably been relying on a lot of bad information about the humanitarian situation, even all these UN lies. I tell you, this head of UNRWA, the UN Refugee Agency, Philip Lazert, he's actually been nominated to be head of the Red Cross next, the next head of the Red Cross, which is a disaster. He doesn't deserve it. He's publicly lying at every chance. And now we've got the statistics of casualties in Gaza that have been highly questioned by it's three academics out of Australia who said they were fudging the numbers all these months in order to make sure that there were always 70% women and children dead, that every day they cooked them in a certain way when the actual number is less than 50%. What have you learned about these false casualty figures in Gaza?
Well, we did a report last week about that, David, and there's also a statistician from the Wharton School of Business in Pennsylvania, University of Pennsylvania, who came up with the same conclusion as these three researchers from Australia. We did a story. We also interviewed Gil Hoffman from Honest Reporting, because many of these numbers that are coming from the Hamas, well, it's not Hamas, it's the Gaza Ministry of Health, but it's run by Hamas. And they publish the figures, and they're parroted by world leaders like President Biden and others, and much of the world media continues to report on these figures, now over 35,000. They don't put in the fact that some of these figures are Hamas fighters. Some of the people that have perished in Gaza were because of errant missiles or rockets from Islamic Jihad or Hamas, as many as perhaps 1,000. And so we don't know the exact number. And the people we talked to, like Gil Hoffman, we talked to Jonathan Conricus, and they all lament the fact that any of these people would perish and die in a conflict. But Israel is trying to do what they can to avoid civilian casualties. Hamas uses their own civilians as human shields to increase the death toll, to use as propaganda against Israel. And when the numbers go out, it's reported in the media. It's affected, the populations, people around the world. That affects politicians. And so the onus becomes on Israel. And it's a playbook, and it's a movie, David, we've seen before. We've seen it 2008, 9, 12, 14, 21. Every war that Hamas has fought with Israel, they use these figures as propaganda fodder against Israel. And sadly, as Gil Hoffman said, the media runs with it, and that affects, it demonizes Israel.
Yeah, the Gaza Ministry of Health says 35,000 plus dead now, but the number of recorded deaths in the hospitals is only 24,000. All of them that are dropped are these women and children stats. I tell you, it's because for months and months, all the nonprofits raising money to feed the people of Gaza, all the UN agency base their policies and decisions on these figures, and they turn out to be false, that every day they're trying to make sure you can raise money on the fact that 70% of the casualties are women and children for months and months, and they cook the numbers every day to maintain that. And it is a racket. It is RICO statute racket on a global scale. But we also know that they're claiming 24,000 that they've been able to identify dead in Gaza. Israel says they've killed 15,000 Hamas soldiers. What have you learned? The U.S. says, Israel says that's probably about 2/3 of the Hamas fighting force, either killed or wounded. out of their 30-some thousand, but the U.S. says it might not even be 30%. Where are you coming out in trying to figure out to how much Hamas has been weakened in Gaza?
Well, I think, as you said, maybe around 35,000 fighters estimated in Gaza. And you're right, several days ago, Israel came out with around 14 or 15,000 that had been killed. The U.S. seems to downplay, that maybe only 30,000 or 30% of the Hamas fighters have been killed, and it's still a formidable or potentially formidable fighting force. I'm just a little bit suspect of what the State Department says about the capacity of Hamas. They seem to curb any positive news about the IDF. For example, they were saying for months that any operation into Rafah would be a catastrophe, that it would take months to move the civilian population out of Rafah into a safe zone. They said that Israel didn't have any credible plans. Well, in the last couple of weeks, it seems that Israel's been able to move almost 1 million Gazans out of Rafah or that area. So they seem to minimize and underplay what actually the IDF is doing. The IDF seems to be doing in an incremental way, going into Rafah, and it seems so far that the catastrophe that may have been predicted is not coming to pass. Instead, it seems like Israel is discovering more and more tunnels in Rafah. They're getting on the Philadelphia corridor between Egypt and Gaza and being able to stop some of these smuggling tunnels that really have been the lifeline for Hamas for many years. And it's another subject, but Egypt seems to be complicit in at least allowing the rearmament of Hamas, and for many, many years, including during the last 7 or 8 months.
Yeah, this is why they were so opposed to it. They're very embarrassed because the weapons were getting in, and they said the tunnels were closed. So whatever Israel finds there, I think it is sensitive how they disclose that. Mm-hmm. But this is why Egypt is up in arms. Someone asked about Terra tunnels on the northern border. I know they found 6 of those a few years back, destroyed them. It's still possible it's going on there. There have been a few tunnels, not so serious, found in Judea, Samaria, and the West Bank. But if you give them a state, you're going to get tunnels and rocket factories and everything from those areas too. Yeah.
Very much so. Yeah, they did discover 6. They don't know, if there are any more, but I know they're a lot more vigilant on the northern border now because of what happened on October 7th. And I don't know how many divisions, but a lot of IDF presence on the northern border, to protect from any cross-border attacks, or, potentially there may be an IDF incursion into South Lebanon to confront Hezbollah.
I tell you, when we visit the Gaza border, you're in a war zone when you hear all that outgoing artillery into Gaza. And on the northern border, the war is right there when you hear all the planes overhead. Yeah. That's what really stands out in the north, all the Israeli planes going in. Okay, we're going to try and wind up here by just asking you, for Christians out there who are watching, what are some key points, 1 or 2 key points they really need to know about this conflict that'll help them defend Israel?
Well, I think, first of all, it would be good to know the history and to be able to help combat any of these slogans, free Palestine, free from the river to the sea. What is the river? What is the sea? What is the historical right of the Jewish people in international law to the land of Israel? What happened in 1922 in the San Remo Conference? What was the Article 8 in the League of Nations mandate for that actually gave the right for the Jewish people to settle here in their homeland? What is the biblical right of the Jewish people to come back to their land? There's never been an indigenous people for thousands of years that have came back to the same land, the same faith, the same language. So it's really a miracle that we're seeing here.
Yeah, on this point, let me interrupt you. You say getting educated on Israel, modern Israel, the conflict. I'll give you a plug. Buy Chris's books. I think you have 3 books on the conflict and your reporting here over the years.
Yeah, Dateline Jerusalem is probably the first one. I would recommend that. The other ones were Destination Jerusalem, ISIS, Iran, and Israel. But I also want to plug the curriculum developed by ICEJ and Susan Michael. And I think it's actually going to be part of the curriculum of the Institute for Israel Studies at Regent University this coming fall. I highly recommend that as a curriculum to give you a framework of understanding to help combat the disinformation, misinformation, and outright lies that are in the world today. And I think that's really imperative that we know the facts, and so that we can discern right from wrong, good from evil. Let me ask you a question too before I my final question, Dave. Tell me about Aliyah. The ICEJ has been so immersed in such a part of bringing the Jewish people back to the land of Israel. Do you sense that because of October 7th, because of the explosion of anti-Semitism, that we might see an explosion of Aliyah, Jews coming back from around the world back here to Israel?
Well, it has been the pattern of recent decades. Whenever there's trouble here and waves of anti-Semitism ripple out from the land of Israel all over the world, you do get an increase in aliyah of Jews returning and moving back to this land, I think from France, and hopefully America, still coming from Russia. There's been a steep increase in the number of people applying. They expect over 30,000 Olim this year, new immigrants to Israel. We've already helped 1,200 this year. That's around 10-12% of the ones who have come, and we've got lots of opportunities to head to bring Jews home from France, from South Africa, from Ethiopia, from all the countries of the former Soviet Union, from Ukraine, Russia, the Baltic states, and India, the B'nai Menashe, others. That all these opportunities are here, and we're very active in it. Yeah. Any other points for Christians to stand with Israel? I'd say the Aliyah, Chris, is one of the bright sides of this conflict. But what else do Christians, how can they defend Israel in this conflict?
I would say 2 things, David. I think, first of all, people need to understand, and we've heard this theme ever since October 7th. The battle that Israel is facing is not just Israel. This is a battle by radical Islam to take over the West, to defeat the West. Israel is the tip of the spear. The United States is next. Europe is next. They want to destroy Western civilization to establish a global caliphate. So I think that is something people really need to understand. These are perilous times, probably much more than we realize. And I think other than that, also, David, is to pray for the peace of Jerusalem, to pray for the Jewish people. And I think maybe like more than ever in my lifetime, that this is a time to stand with the Jewish people, to encourage our Jewish brothers and sisters, stand with them, pray for them, advocate for them, because they feel isolated, they feel alone. And I think, the ICEJ, it's part of your DNA to stand with, to support Israel and the Jewish people. And I think that's a calling for all of us for such a time as this.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, Chris, for your time and all the input and all the information we've received. I hope everyone's enjoyed it and learned a lot. I highly respect you as a professional journalist and as a brother in the Lord. I don't know if you've won any, Peabody Awards, Pulitzers, but we're going to have to come up with a prize for you named after you because of all these years of excellent service in Jerusalem. Amen.
Well, thank you, David. I appreciate that as a brother and as all the work that you and ICEJ do. I would say if people want to see something that we do, you can go to JerusalemDateline.com. We have 2 shows a week on Tuesdays and Fridays, hopefully in the near future going Monday through Friday. But and so then you can see some of the work that we do.
Okay. All right. That's our time for today. We hope you've enjoyed the ICJ webinar series this Thursday, every Thursday at 3 p.m. Israel time. And stay tuned at the top of the hour. We have our global prayer gathering, 4 p.m. Israel time. We're going to be praying once again, day 230, I believe it is, praying every day since this war began with Christian leaders and Christians from all over the world, interceding for Israel and the region, because we love the Arab people too. But we believe God is a Zionist. He's the original Zionist. He came up with the return of the Jewish people to the land, and we're going to stand with him in this. Thank you, and come back next week, next Thursday, for the ICJ webinar series.
Thank you for joining us for this informative webinar. Be sure to subscribe to our social media channels or visit our website at icej.org for upcoming webinars and more ICEJ exclusive content.
Protests all over the world. Here's a live look at the east side where demonstrators are on the move from the Israeli consulate to the UN.
And Fox 5's Lisa Evers joins us live.
The Israel-Hamas war stoking protests across the U.S. at various college campuses.
We saw posters of Israelis kidnapped by Hamas.
Obama finally retaliated over the weekend for Israel's planning to seek out Hamas official by launching a bomb at 60 rockets.
That's good. This is good. We can calm this down.
Around the world, today is war in Israel, and here's the latest news from the last couple days. Obama finally retaliated over the weekend for Israel's targeting a senior Hamas official in